In 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bombs on Japan. I was 15 years old. After the shock of this awful power, this terrible destruction, a great question arose in my mind that has guided my entire life. And here is the question: what is the meaning of all our new powers that is good? And out of this question came another: what are positive images of the future equal to all our new powers, mainly science and technology? Where is Western civilization going? Where is human civilization going that we want to go toward? And I naturally felt somebody knew. So I started a quest through reading through the world philosophies and the world religions for an image of our future equal to our new power. And I couldn't find it. The powers were so new. And then I was taken to visit President Eisenhower in 1952, just after he became president. And I was introduced into the Oval Office, and he said, "Hello, young lady, what can I do for you?" And he's very charming and charismatic. So I cleared my throat and I said, "Mr. President, I have a question for you." "Yes, young lady?" "Mr. President, what do you think is the meaning of our new powers that is good?" He looked totally startled. He looked up like this, he shook his head, and he said, "I have no idea." And it flashed through my mind, well, we better find out. And I decided to give my life to that question. And Humanity Ascending is my response to the question of the meaning of our powers, the direction of Western and human civilization, and images of the future equal to our potential. I invite you to come on this great journey with me so that we can find a new way through together, equal to our spiritual, social, and scientific, technological capacities. Our story begins before the beginning, out of the cosmos, out of the silence, out of the mind of God, out of no thing at all, emerged everything that was, is, and will be. The design of those first 3 seconds of the original flaring forth were perfect, supremely intelligent. And that impulse, that design is still operating through us now. 14 billion years ago, the universe was born. Time and space began. 4.5 billion years ago, our solar system and Earth. For billions of years, nature has been evolving. 3.5 billion years ago, life appeared. The DNA, the genetic code, the information code in every cell. About 1 billion years ago, multicellular organisms appear. Plants, animals, the biosphere emerged. 500 million years ago, the first fish. 200 million years ago, dinosaurs inhabit the earth. 50 million years ago, primates, horses, elephants roamed the earth. And 6 to 7 million years ago, a little creature, Australopithecus africanus, appeared that we think was the very first sign of a pre-human emerging out of the animal world. And about 2.6 million years ago, human life began. We are the result of billions of years of reproductive success. Coded in us is this whole story. Now, let's look at this story through evolutionary eyes. Let's imagine it as an evolutionary spiral so that we can catch the pattern in this great journey of life. The formation of universe, the formation of Earth, the formation of life, the appearance of multicellular life, animals, plants, the biosphere, the emergence of human life. And now as we go up the sequence of human life, we begin to see we may be going around the next turn in our spiral. At the heart of the spiral, out of the silence, comes the core of the spiral. We can see it as divine intelligence. We can see it as implicate order. We can see it as the mind of the cosmos. But what we see is that it is divinely intelligent. Some of us call it God. The subjective experience of this intelligence is in you and me. It is that yearning in us to be more, to do more, to express more. It is what Benjamin Franklin called the divinity in our humanity, that we can feel pressing us now as we are part of this story ourselves. Now, in order to get guidelines as to what to do now, let's look at the lessons that we can learn from looking at the universe, Earth, life, animal life, human life, and now us going around possibly a next turn. What can we learn from the past that could guide us in the present to create a future equal to our potential? The first lesson is very obvious. Quantum transformations are nature's tradition. Nature takes jumps from one state to another. First there was no Earth, then there was Earth. First there was no life, then there was life. There were no humans, then we appeared. Newness is inherent in the nature of reality. The nature of nature is to transform. Lesson number 2, crises precede transformation, and problems are evolutionary drivers. And when a crisis exists that can't be resolved by doing more of the same, you have to look to innovation and transformation, and that's what nature has been doing for billions of years. For example, in the early seas of Earth, the single cells were very successful for a time. They divided and divided to reproduce. They became very popular. They overpopulated. They stagnated. They were running out of energy. And if we had been cells in the early seas of Earth, we might have thought we were coming to an end. But what happened was an amazing set of events, very complex, but the chlorophyll molecule, known as one of the great revolutionaries on planet Earth, invented a process called photosynthesis, captured sunlight, brought that energy into the dwindling energy of the single cells, but oxygen was a poison to the single cells. If we had had an Office of Technology Assessment discussing oxygen, we probably would have outlawed it. But what actually happened was mutation. Multicellular life emerged capable of utilizing the oxygen. And out of that amazing set of circumstances came animals, plants, and the biosphere. Out of that crisis came innovation and transformation. The problem was an evolutionary driver. Now, another great lesson that we can see is that nature creates new whole systems out of separate parts. The word for that is synergy, the coming together of separate parts to make a new whole that is greater than and different from the sum of the parts. And you can look at the evolutionary spiral. Atoms create molecules. Molecules create cells. Cells join together and create multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms create vast complexes of very cooperating, synergistic whole systems. For example, our body has 70 trillion cells, all of them exquisitely complex little individuals working together to create a body so different from and so much greater than the sum of its parts. So we learn that nature creates these jumps through greater synergy, through greater cooperation. And we also learn from studying the past that when a species is young, it's competitive, it eats up its environment, and it competes with itself. And it hits a limit to growth. If it does not learn to cooperate, it becomes extinct. You can see what we might be getting to here about our own species. As I mentioned, the earliest shift from the animal world to this unprecedented human world was a little creature called Australopithecus africanus. Lucy was known as the first of our species who stood upright. And if we had seen him, it would be almost impossible to imagine that out of this small biped, which looked almost exactly the same as the animal, there was an infinite difference. Invisible at that time, I'm sure, but out of that came the rise of humans. It is a quantum jump from the most intelligent animal to the first human. And then we have a whole sequence of the emergence of humans. There are many different types of humans that were arriving at that time, but the most well-known is called Homo habilis. Homo habilis was a tool maker. Then came Homo erectus. Homo erectus is famous for having discovered fire. And out of Homo erectus, we have Homo neanderthal. They were intelligent. They buried food with their dead. Concurrent with that, Homo sapiens, our type, emerged out of this evolutionary process. Homo sapiens sapiens, the one who knows that it knows. Self-reflective consciousness emerged in the early human world. Around the same time, apparently, Homo neanderthal became extinct. It isn't fully understood what happened there. Louis Leakey, one of the great paleoanthropologists, thinks that Homo sapiens sapiens had a better capacity for food sharing and cooperation than Neanderthal. So Homo sapiens began this amazing journey, and out of self-reflective consciousness came language. We could communicate outside of our own genetic codes, and every generation could teach the next generation, and we began to speed up time with the capacity to learn. Now we are going up from the turn in the spiral of the origin of humanity toward whatever this next turn on the spiral might be. And we can see that in the early phases of human history, we lived in small, relatively egalitarian tribes. And in fact, we survived because we were capable of cooperating. And we gained in enormous capacities. Once we learned agriculture, something new began to come in. We had surplus. And out of this came civilization, came arts, came culture, came this great explosion of creativity. And around about 800 BC, something new began to emerge again. Great individuals broke through and founded the religions of this world. We had, for example, Isaiah in Israel. We had Zoroaster in Persia, Buddha in India, and of course, Jesus and Mohammed. These were individuals, in my understanding, who had the experience of the core of the spiral breaking through as their consciousness. Civilizations were built around these great humans, and we loved them so much that they became the center of each great culture on this planet. We see in this whole sequence in the last 8,000 years, and now more recently with the origin of religion, this yearning for something more, to transcend the limitations of self-consciousness, to transcend the limitations of the creature-human condition. And remembering the spiral, nature takes quantum jumps. It's always building toward more consciousness, more life, more freedom. And very recently, the last 300 years, we begin to gain radical new powers that actually lead to transformation. The first of these powers is democracy itself. The idea that all people are created equal. The idea of the release of individual creativity and potential through freedom. Democracy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This can be seen as an evolutionary advance. Nothing can stop it. And the other great tool of radical transformation is science and technology. And that began also about 300 years ago with Newton, Galileo, Copernicus. It was the human mind being able to penetrate deeply into nature, to discover nature's invisible processes of creation, so that we can, through technology, begin to work with those processes by human intent to change the world, to improve the world, or to destroy the world. Let's see our turn on the spiral as the emergence of a more intelligent, more spiritual, more conscious, more compassionate, more free, more universal species. Let's place ourselves in the great tradition of quantum transformations and see how we can interpret what's happening now. So let's start in the 1950s. An amazing decade. It was called the boring decade. But actually, under the surface, huge things were happening. Perhaps the most important was Crick and Watson discovered the language of the DNA, the genetic code. There came at that time the origin and development of the computer. Little did we know what that could mean as it spread to billions of people and the internet and the new nervous system of the whole planetary body. So we begin to see ourselves going up the turn in the spiral with some radically new capacities. Now let's enter the 60s. Remember, we started with the great image of the bomb. And for me, that started us on the turn of the spiral. The next great image is the Apollo rocket taking off from Earth and going directly beyond the biosphere into outer space. We became the astronauts. We became extraterrestrials. We gained evolutionary eyes, and we looked back on our Earth and we saw it as one living body. We saw it as a beautiful blue marble in space. And we saw ourselves for the very first time as Earth people landing on a new world. We became physically universal. We've had expanded universal consciousness from those great early humans, the avatars, but we haven't physically ever gone beyond the biosphere until the 1960s and set foot on a new world. In the 60s, Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, the first early awareness that we perhaps were too successful, that we could destroy our own biosphere, that we were overpopulating, that we were polluting, and only a few people understood it, but it awakened at the same time as we set foot on a new world. We did not know we had an environment. Robert Mueller, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, told me that in the 70s, he tried to convene a conference on environment and there was no word for it. The consciousness started to expand. We had the human potential movement. We had the transpersonal psychology movement. We had the awakening through the Beatles and the music, and people began to expand in a cosmic consciousness. It was very obvious that our planet was complexifying, it was interacting, it was interlinking. We could see our defense systems are linked, our communication systems are linked, our environments are linked. We're one planetary body, and we're all members of this more complex body, and we began to feel it and see it. The most important thing to many of us is the women woke up. And I was one of them. I was one of them. Before the 60s, I was the typical woman described by Betty Friedan in The Feminine Mystique. And she said that women in the 50s had a problem. There was a certain sadness, a certain feeling that something was wrong. And what was that sadness? Is that we felt that we had a sense of identity, something more than wife and mother. No matter how much we loved our children, no matter how much we loved our husband, there was something more that wanted to come through, and that was considered neurotic. And then I read Teilhard de Chardin, the Catholic Jesuit paleontologist, and he saw God in evolution. He saw evolution rising to ever higher complexity, ever higher order, and he even foresaw that a time would come on Earth when the complexity was so great that we would connect center with center, heart with heart, whole being with whole being, and there would be what he called the awakening of the noosphere. The thinking layer of Earth would waken, and we would experience ourselves as one body, as one whole. And I began to think, is this the meaning of our power? Are we moving towards a time where the individual will find a way to express their life purpose within a planet that's integrating into a whole, where there will be a jump in consciousness of each of us as part of the whole system? And I began to be very excited. Then as we went into the 70s, 80s, 90s, up to the year 2000, you can see that the problems increased, the complexities increased, the systems to run the planet started to show their failures. The great, powerful communist empire collapsed. The United Nations showed its difficulties. Global capitalism began to reveal certain flaws. There was no vision of where we were going still. There was no evolutionary agenda. People were still trying to control things within the context of the existing world, and they couldn't because the problems continued to escalate. Einstein said, our problems cannot be resolved in the same state of consciousness in which we are creating them. The year 2000 could be the next great milestone. Do you remember the Millennium Celebration? Do you remember the spontaneous excitement of people all over the earth, and the rockets and the fireworks? And it wasn't orchestrated by the corporations, the church, or the state. People were expecting something new. But what were they expecting? Because there wasn't a hint of it in the media, there wasn't a hint of it among our political, academic, religious leaders, that something new was breaking through. But those of us who became evolutionaries knew it. Now we are in transition towards something new. We're either going to break down or break through. And during late transition, everything is accelerating. The problems are accelerating, and so are the innovations and the creative solutions. The despair is accelerating, and so is the consciousness of new powers, new capacities. So we see we're in the midst of a quantum jump. And we just begin to get a hint of the answer to our question. What is the meaning of our new powers that's good? What are images of our future equal to our spiritual, social, and scientific potential? I see that inherent in our capacity for conscious evolution, inherent in our understanding of how nature works, inherent in our alignment with the core of the spiral, including all our vast new capacities in science and technology, which are so much greater than they were in 1945, because that was just atomic power. Now we have nuclear power, biotechnology, nanotechnology, living and working in space, quantum computing. These are powers so great that if they are misused on this earth, they will destroy us. But if we see that our journey is both to restore this earth and free ourselves from the current suffering, and to explore the further reaches of the human spirit and the universe beyond our planet, we may see that our new capacities are given to us as the tools of our conscious evolution. But in order to use those new capacities, we have to be attracted to an image of our future. And for me, I describe this image as we are becoming a universal humanity. We are becoming universal humans. We are learning to be connected to the heart, to the whole of life. We are learning that we are awakened from within by the core of the spiral to express and be more. Now, this is just now a vague vision to us. And one good metaphor for it that will help us believe in it is the metaphor of the metamorphosis of the caterpillar to the butterfly. This is a story that comes from Nori Huddle, who really researched this, and the way she put it is scientifically accurate, that as the caterpillar creates its chrysalis and it's bloated with too much food, within the caterpillar there are little imaginal discs. And these imaginal discs are carrying the new genetic code of the coming butterfly. The caterpillar recognizes the discs as foreign and tries to kill them. And this is interesting because in the 60s, if we see this as our time of birth, there were the assassinations of those individuals like John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, who were holding an image of what we could become. They were assassinated. Within the body of the caterpillar, the first imaginal discs are killed by the immune system. But the program in them is such that they proliferate and they become imaginal cells. That's a wonderful word because an imaginal cell must hold the image of the butterfly to come. The immune system is still trying to kill them. However, there are so many of them now that they begin to connect. They begin to resonate. They begin to proliferate so rapidly that at some point the immune system of the caterpillar surrenders. The caterpillar gives up, and the imaginal cells take that substance of the caterpillar and transform it into the butterfly. Well, it's pretty obvious what this image here is. There were only a few imaginal discs. Maybe they were the great advanced humans that founded the religions. There have been scientific and visionary geniuses throughout all of humanity. But recently, starting in the 60s, millions of us started to wake up. We began to proliferate, and the caterpillar body tries to stop this, tries to hold us where we are, but we're proliferating because the conditions on Earth are such that we are actually programmed, patterned with images of the future. Every human being who has some impulse or image of a better world, who has some sense of a world beyond the strife, beyond the suffering, a world where our creativity is used, is an imaginal cell in the body of the caterpillar, and we're beginning to resonate, beginning to coalesce, and we're just at the stage, possibly, of seeing a picture of what the composite imaginal cells could make. What, if you put all those separate pieces together, what would it be? An image for this is if you had the fragments of stained glass, beautiful pieces of colored glass, separate, you wouldn't see the picture. But if you put those fragments together, you can see something as beautiful as the rose window of Chartres. If you put the imaginal cells together, they're coded with the image of the butterfly. If you put humans together with their visions, their aspirations, and what they choose to create, you begin to see the outlines of the new humanity and of the new human. The butterfly is a miracle, but then the whole process of evolution is a miracle, is a mystery, no matter from what point of view you try to understand it. From the purely scientific, from the purely religious, or from the evolutionary point of view, and everything in between, we all fall down in awe at the mystery and grandeur of our story. And as conscious evolutionists, we're beginning to put ourselves into the story during the time of a quantum transformation, when it's late transition on planet Earth, and what that means is everything is speeding up, including our own self-evolution. And while innovations may take a long time to manifest, a new economic system, new education, new politics, the new person is coming forward much more quickly. But the key now is for every one of us to realize that we are an expression of this process of creation. That our motivation is the energy of that core of the spiral breaking through. And when we connect with each other, when we awaken to the fact that we're all part of this living body, we can see the possibility within our lifetime of shifting the energy on this earth from devolution, competition, and destruction to creativity, connectivity, and a future so magnificent that it will attract us beyond competition and beyond war to a future of literally infinite capacity. This is our challenge. This is our opportunity. This is the great journey we're on, and I look forward to taking this journey with you.
This world is full of hearts yearning to make some changes. We like to change a world that's getting out of hand. A change of this magnitude seems impossible to do, but together, come on, together. To
Nobody went to college to learn how to help evolve a planet. When I graduated from Bryn Mawr in 1951, I was told that most of the problems of the world had been solved.